Hi everyone, and crystal blessings. I was just going through my email answering some student questions, and there was one email that came in particular that had some really good questions in, and I thought everyone could benefit from a little video explanation. So the first part of this question was, when I have a client coming in for the first time, there's a lot of information that they need to convey to me as a healer. There's a lot of forms they need to fill out and conversations that need to be had. So how does this all exactly happen? How do I talk to them regarding their expectations and goals for the session and what's going on with them physically, energetically, emotionally? This kind of happens in a number of different ways. When I first started doing healing sessions, I would book, say I was doing an hour session with a client. For the initial intake with a client, for their very first appointment, I would add an extra 30 minutes. So if it was a 30-minute session, I would do 60 minutes. If it were a 60-minute session, I would do 90 minutes. And in the beginning, I was charging the same price for that initial session as I was for subsequent sessions. But ultimately, I felt like, I really needed that time with the client, and I really had to value my time because it does take some time to kind of really get to know someone that you're working with. So I ultimately ended up adding an extra $50 onto that initial intake session. Most people were very understanding about this, and it's actually pretty standard across the board for different types of wellness-based practices to have that initial intake session be just a little bit more to account for the time it takes to get to know your client. So I was doing this all in person, kind of taking notes and filling out my intake forms with my clients, talking to them about why they were there to see me, what made them want to try crystal therapy, what their goals for the session were, and what they wanted to accomplish. And I did find over time that it became harder and harder for me to prepare for a session fully and know what to bring. And I had a point where in my healing space, I pretty much just had every crystal I owned because I never knew what I was going to need. Well, that became not very practical over time. And so I actually started doing my intake with my clients by phone and sometimes by Skype. So I would actually do a half an hour intake session with them, and I wouldn't charge them for that until they actually came to their first appointment. There were a few people that never showed up for their appointments, and I, was out a little bit of time, but just know that that's going to happen. Ultimately, you're going to make up for it so much more with the people that you are helping and those people that do come back and see you for repeat visits because they're really happy with the service that you provided. So it's great to book a 30-minute session with your client if they're a first-time client where you can talk and connect with them about what's going on, for doing this by phone or by Skype, whatever's more comfortable for you. And it also lets you know if they're a good match for you as an ideal client and if you're a good match for them as a healer. So it gives you a chance to get to know each other. Then during their very first session, they'll pay that extra $50. At least that's how I ran my practice for a short while, until it grew even more. And that worked really well for me because I could bring the supplies and tools that I needed to those specific sessions. Now, this might also be beneficial for you if your client has an issue that you're unfamiliar with, particularly if it's a health condition that you really don't know what it is. It might give you an extra chance to talk that out with the client and find out a little bit more about it. That way you can do a little bit of your own research after your call with your client and decide which crystals you think would be most beneficial to help your client energetically. That's one reason I really like doing the intake session ahead of time. It can cause a little bit of difficulty because sometimes booking that time and scheduling it can be a little bit difficult. So there are some really good online scheduling and appointment booking websites that you can use to help book those calls with your clients during your availability to make it really nice and easy for you as well as for them. So they can hop on your website, or you don't even actually need a website to use some of them. You'll have a dedicated link where your client can go click that link or follow it on the back of your business card, book a session with you for doing an intake. You'll get to talk with them, get to know them, why they want to see you. Then you'll have time to prepare for that session as far as what kinds of crystals or other healing tools you'll need to bring with to your session. And then you'll just do your normal fee-based structure, or you can add an additional charge for the intake session at the time that they come see their first appointment. So, and then there's kind of some follow-up questions to this, and I'm just looking at my notes here to see what some of those were. How long does it typically take to choose the appropriate crystals? Well, it really depends on if you have had experience working with that particular situation before. I use a combination of kind of logic and intuition. So I let my intuition guide me toward which crystals I need, but sometimes, again, if it's an obscure health condition or something like that that you really want to be able to energetically support your client with crystals, you may have to look up and research a little bit more about that condition. You might even go to your crystal library and look up in some books to see what other healers have recommended in the past. That can be a little bit more time consuming. So it really just depends on your knowledge base and that kind of thing, or how willing you are to trust your intuition when it comes to choosing the correct crystals. So I'll usually go do a little bit of research if necessary, choose the crystals that seem to resonate logically, and then I'll do one last scan of some of my healing crystals, just using my hands and intuition, and see if anything calls my attention that may be useful for the session. So I'll actually think about the client and ask if there are any other crystals that need to be brought to the session, do a little energetic scan, and see if I pick up on something. You could also use your pendulum or anything like that to help you choose those crystals, just like we talk about in the basic crystal healing class, to see if there's something that really stands out that would work well for you to bring with. And I think that about sums it up for a little bit more in-depth information on how you can kind of run that once you start to have more clients and you need that time for intake and you want to be able to prepare for sessions. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a good idea on a way that might work well for you. But of course, as always, use your judgment and your inner knowledge and inner guidance to see what will work best for you in your sessions. You might want to go purely intuitively. You might like that face-to-face connection with your clients. You might also be in a situation like I was in the beginning, where I had all my tools available in my healing space all the time, so no matter what I needed, it was available. But if you do need that little bit of extra planning time, this might be a system that'll work well for you. Thanks so much for watching, and crystal blessings.